Hi BookTube, it's Amy. I'm here for my weekly reading update. Once again, I'm filming this on a Thursday and I think I'll just go ahead and post it on the Thursday. So as you can see, my reading table has gotten a little bit out of hand. So I'm just going to start grabbing things and talking about them. On the top here, I have a book that arrived in the mail today. I don't know much of anything about the plot of this one, but this is J.M. Barrie's very first published novel called Better Dead. He came to sort of regret publishing it. He thought it was a bit of a piece of trash, as I'm sure many authors come to think of their first novels as. But it's just, a cheap library discard. And it was first published in 1887, so that's certainly very early in his career, and this is a 1925 reprint. And the opening sentence of this book seems to catch my interest quite a lot. When Andrew Rich went to London, his intention was to become private secretary to a member of the cabinet. If time permitted, he proposed writing for the press. So this sounds quite entertaining. I noticed that J.M. Barrie likes to create characters who mirror him in some ways, and so we have moving to London to write for the press, a little bit on the autobiographical side of things, but working for a member of cabinet, not something that J.M. Barrie did himself. And so this will be quite interesting to dive into this little volume. That was J.M. Barrie's first novel. Set that over there. So next on the pile is a book that I read the other weekend, so almost 2 weeks ago now. And this is The Student by Carrie Fagan. This is something that I think I saw on Sean the Bookmaniac's channel. And I purchased it immediately and it arrived like almost the next day. On the front there's the GG Books sticker, so it's a finalist for the Governor General's Award. But this was a fun little book. It's 2 snapshots of a woman's life. Miriam, she comes from a Jewish family. She lives in Toronto. And when the book opens in 1957, she is a student of literature at a university in Toronto. And she has ambitious plans for her life. Although she doesn't know what she wants in terms of her personal relationships, in terms of marriage, she knows what she wants in terms of her intellectual life, in terms of her career. She wants to apply to study literature at the master's level and go on for a career in academia. And she thinks that she has everything planned out until she solicits the one professor who she thinks is going to support her in her quest in writing a letter of recommendation, in her quest for her to apply to study at the master's level at that university. But he sort of laughs at her. He becomes, outraged that she would even consider taking the place in a master's program that could be going to a man, could be going to someone, as he says, who is not going to quit and drop out and, marry and become a wife and mother. And so her dreams are not completely shattered, but she sees them as sort of hopeless, which leads her to sort of spiral into this impulsive stage in her life where she meets a man on campus who is very politically and socially aware, who is living in a basement somewhere, and she starts hooking up with him despite still going out with her boyfriend who she's been going out with since high school, her boyfriend who her parents seem to like. And it's just the story of her struggle, and her struggles aren't that dramatic compared to what they could be, but they are still sort of a snapshot of someone's very realistic life at a point in time. And then we transition over to the last third of the novel, which is set in 2005. And she has done many of the things that she set out to do. She is married and she has had overall a pretty good life. It is her son's wedding day and she is reflecting on a few things, but it's not as introspective as you would think from a novel set in two eras. It's not as though Carrie Fagan is trying to, make some grand statement. Rather, it's just a very interesting and thought-provoking look at two stages of someone's life. And I quite liked it. I quite liked both parts, and it was certainly fascinating to see, despite how bad everything looked at one moment in time in your early 20s. Things can be entirely different and things can have worked out for the best by the time you reach, retirement age. And so I quite enjoyed this. Then the other week, I also read John Cagg's American Philosophy, A Love Story. And it is a memoir about an American professor of philosophy at the point that he is telling this story, that the point that he was at when the event that he tells here happened, he was on the tenure track. But he was a professor of philosophy who was interested in American philosophy, specifically the history of American philosophy, and he was setting out to write this paper on American philosophy, and he was going from library to archives, and he had hit a roadblock. He was sort of on the downhill in a marriage that was about to end, and he was in a pretty depressed state when he stumbled across the library of an American philosopher by the name of William Ernest Hocking, who I'd never heard of. Apparently he was, quote, one of the last giants of American philosophy. And this library is sort of a book lover's nightmare, but also a book lover's dream. It is sort of out in the country, in the middle of nowhere. There are no locks on the doors. It is unheated, more or less open to the elements and to pests. But it's on private land. And the family of Hocking have sort of let it lie. They don't know what to do with it. They're not really in the area. And he stumbles across this library chocked full of rare, historically important books and papers. Everything from first editions of Hobbes, Descartes, and Kant to the papers of more recent American philosophers and big literary names. And so throughout this memoir, he documents for us his journey working with the family to catalog the contents of this library and to donate them to institutions. But at the same time, he is taking us as a reader through the history of American philosophy and how external influences had an impact on the thought and the philosophy of the day in 19th and 20th century America. And I thoroughly enjoyed it. There was, this adventure and discovery aspect to it as he took us through, discovering what was in this library, but also this educational aspect as he tells us the bare details about philosophy in the United States and sort of schools of philosophy. The only thing that I didn't like so much was how he related this philosophy to his own personal life, specifically the end of his marriage. He recounts, doing something that seems quite, I don't know, it just didn't sit right with me. So his marriage was on the way out. It seemed like his wife in some ways was trying. She wanted to go on his work trip with him. He didn't want anything to do with her. And he stops off at a pawn shop and pawns his wedding ring, sort of as an announcement that he wants a divorce. And so he just comes home to, he comes home, no wedding ring. And his wife, of course, is pretty angry. I think she was in tears. That's certainly not a very nice way to end a marriage. But then he gets into, the building of this new relationship with his work colleague who is also studying philosophy. And they end up cataloging this library together. But there was a moment in this book where I didn't realize that they in fact had gotten married at this point. All I perceived was a man in love with his colleague who was trying to figure out a way to tell her, and spinning some thoughts that were a little bit odd, considering I didn't realize that she was his wife. It would be deeply unsettling if this was just him spinning these thoughts about a colleague. But I guess it's all right if you have the context that she is his wife and he's not just pining after his colleague without her consent, so to speak. So I enjoyed this. Wasn't that much into his personal life, but it certainly is an excellent way to look at American philosophy, and I think an excellent introduction for those of us who don't know all that much. Setting those aside. So here's a book that I reread the other weekend. This is Valerie Taylor's novel, Return to Lesbos, and I'm just trying to remember the publication date on this. This is from the 60s, I believe. Yep, 1963. So this is technically a sequel to Stranger on Lesbos, but I've read Stranger on Lesbos. It was all right. Strangers on Lesbos is about Frances, who, while taking some classes at a college, discovers that she is a lesbian and comes to the realization that she's not in love with her husband and never really has been. And in that novel, she goes on this journey of exploration, discovering who she is, all with the backdrop of trying to sort of maintain her marriage for the sake of her son, Bill. Now, when we come to Return to Lesbos, which is the sequel to that, she has broken off the relationship with the woman that she met in that novel, and she is recently, celebrated the marriage of her son, Bill. Everything is settled, and so now she realizes, I really could leave my husband. Her husband is pretty cold. He seems to think that, her relationship with a woman was just a phase, and now she'll settle down, sort of the same way that other wives might have an affair with a man or get hooked on drugs or get into drinking. It's just a phase. It's her way of acting out. And so he thinks everything is settled, and off they go to this small rural city somewhere where he is moving for work. And he encourages her to decorate the house and have the wives of his colleagues over for cocktail parties and, women's gossip sessions. And she is just sort of done with this. Instead, she is planning and looking for a way and a reason to leave her husband for good. And so when she walks into a bookstore one day and sees a wonderful, boyish woman by the name of Erica, she realizes that she finally has a reason, a motive to leave. And so this novel is about her building that relationship with Erica, who is very much traumatized by the death of her previous girlfriend, but also about her finding that courage to leave her husband behind. And so this is one that I love to reread every now and then. And one of the great things about it is that even though it's from 1963, it is one of the few lesbian pulp novels of that era with a happy ending. Erica and Frances are together in the end. It is a romance novel very much in that sense, despite their own pasts with tragedy. And it's certainly in a different vein from Stranger on Lesbos, which was published in 1957, which does have that unhappy ending to it. And so when I reread Valerie Taylor, this is one of the ones that I often pick up. On to what I am reading at the moment. So this is a biography of illustrator Hugh Thompson, his art, his life, and his his art, his letters, and his charm. This is by M.H. Spielman and Walter Gerald. So Hugh Thompson was an English illustrator. I discovered him through some of the illustrated J.M. Barrie editions that I purchased, but I've since found out that he is well known for his illustrated editions of Jane Austen. He produced illustrations for Pride and Prejudice, and it is that very well known illustration with the peacock, if you've seen that. His illustrations are widely well known. And so he produced those for a certain publisher, and then Macmillan came to him and said, we'd like you to do illustrations for Sense and Sensibility, for Persuasion, for Mansfield Park, and for Emma. And he became such a well-known illustrator that for a while it became almost a thing for there to be an autumn release of a Hugh Thompson illustrated book. And despite his struggles with ill health, he had a prolific career in illustration. And I actually found it quite wild. I'm a little over halfway through, but he did some illustrations for a book, and these illustrations were so well liked that they were adopted for a line of dishes. You can actually get, plates and bowls and cups with Hugh Thompson's illustrations on them. And I am really enjoying reading through this book. There's excellent color illustrations in here, a lot of black and whites. And here we have one of his books that didn't do so well. So this was for a children's book. People thought it was too violent, and so they didn't want to purchase it from the shops for their children. But that was for Hugh Thompson's illustrated fairy book, Jack the Giant Killer of 1898. And it had been the intention of the publishers to have him do a whole series of fairy books, but that one sort of flopped, and so they said, we're sort of done with that. And he did illustrations for reprints of Sir Walter Scott. Here's some examples there. As I said, for Jane Austen, for books that were being released in his day as well. And he also illustrated some book plates, created book plates for some of his friends. And so I'm working my way through this, and I did get to the point here where the author talks about this book here that arrived in the mail for me last week as well. And this is a book I bought solely because it is illustrated by Hugh Thompson. This is a reprint, so it's certainly not a first edition, but it does have the same gold cover here. So this is a Kentucky Cardinal and Aftermath by James Lane Allen. I think it's nice because we have a dedication, Evelyn Mary Shaw with Mother's Fond Love, June 14th, 1912. It's always nice to see a nice little dedication in the front. So this is a 1909 printing. And as I said, it does have the original illustrations that Hugh Thompson did. And the thing with Hugh Thompson is, so he started out working as a clerk in a linen manufacturer, and he loved art, he loved to draw, and so he wanted to make that shift. He was apprenticed. His father agreed to let him. The company he was apprenticed to agreed to let him go, and he went on to a publishing house in Belfast. So he was Irish, but he did most of his work in England, in London. He spent many of his years illustrating in London because that illustration just wasn't being done in Belfast. He started off in Belfast at a publishing house, and he spent most of his time doing illuminating work, coloring in illustrations. He got to, copy other people's work and work on Christmas cards, but as an illustrator, there just weren't opportunities there because everything that they published there, that they reproduced, came from London. They got their illustrations from London. So off he went to London, and he wasn't there too long before he was hired by a literary magazine to actually create illustrations for the magazine, and I'm forgetting exactly what it's called. EIM, English Illustrated Magazine, that's what it's called. And so he was actually on contract for them. I think the fee was £5 a week for him to work exclusively for them. The English Illustrated Magazine was actually owned by Macmillan, I believe, and so that's how he ended up doing a few illustrated books for them. And when the editor of that magazine retired, Hugh Thompson stepped back from that as well, because he didn't really want to work for anyone else. He expected that the new editor perhaps wouldn't want to keep him on staff. And the moment he did that, that's when things opened up, and he became almost a household name within the book world, within the publishing world in London. And that's when he began to get offers from America. And as I said, he had a very prolific career in illustration. So that's Hugh Thompson. And I'll be finishing that. And then, of course, I am reading Henri de Balzac. I finished reading At the Sign of the Cat and the Rocket, which is the first story in this collection, and I will have a video about that up probably in the next couple of days. It was a short little work looking at marriage, and it had exactly the perspective on marriage that I would expect from a writer like Balzac. So I'll leave that there for now. Stack those up, and up here we have something more that came in the mail for me this week. This is a little stapled article here, Early Printers and Printing in the Canadas by H. Pearson Gundy, produced by the Bibliographical Society of Canada, Toronto, 1964. This is something I purchased off of Abe Books. I am certainly interested in printing and early printing in Canada. And so this was a neat little find to come across. And apparently this was a paper read before the Bibliographical Society of Canada at an annual meeting in Niagara Falls in 1956. And this is the revised and extended version. And so it looks like it's going to give me a little bit of history on printing in the 18th and early 19th century here in Canada. And I'm already seeing some reproductions in here. An act to lay and collect a duty upon stills, a speech of His Excellency John Graves Simcoe, Lieutenant Governor of the Province of Upper Canada, weekly newspaper to be entitled the Kingston Gazette. And then I can't find it now, but I was flipping through and I saw something about the Plains of Abraham here, which, if you know anything about Canadian history, Abraham's Plains, you know, that quite sticks out, and it appears, oh, I just found it here, it appears to be a poem of some sort that was printed. Thy plains, O Abram, and thy pleasing views, where hid in shades I fit and court the muse, grateful I sing, for there from care and noise, oft have I fled to taste thy silent joys. And that was printed by William Brown Printer, Quebec, 1789. So that would have been printed in Lower Canada. So that's an interesting arrival in the mail. And then I am also reading my way through this book collecting game by A. Edward Newton. This is something that I've been reading aloud on my channel. Tomorrow I'll be posting The Auction Room, which is the next chapter in here. And I've got this little book that's just sitting here waiting for me to read it. Carson McCullers' The Haunted Boy. Ever since I read A Member of the Wedding by Carson McCullers about a year ago, maybe more than a year ago now, people have been telling me to pick up something more by Carson McCullers, and so I ordered this little book here, and I will be giving that a try in the near future. Also on the stack here, I have a copy of Byways Among English Books by Cyril Davenport. and it's actually still got a dust jacket intact in pretty good condition, which was a bit of a surprise to me to find. The book itself is a little bit warped, but this is from 1927, and it's another one of my purchases in an attempt to read as much as I can about books, book illustration, book printing, book collecting. So there's that. Not sure when I'm going to get to that. Just by sort of chance on a whim, I've actually read the first couple of chapters of Henry James, The Wings of the Dove, which I'm quite enjoying. We'll see when I manage to pick it up again next. I always seem to get distracted when I start this book, because actually I've now read up to where I read last time before I got distracted. And yeah, this seems like an excellent book. It's something I really want to read, but as you can see, I've got distracted by new things that arrived in the mail. And I've still got a bunch of other stuff here on my reading table. I've got Maupassant's selected short stories. I've got Typographic Years by Blumthal. I've got Holbrook Jackson's The Anatomy of Bibliomania still going on. I've got Stephen King's new book, If It Bleeds, that I've been meaning to read. And I've still got Letters to Darling Lisa Ma at the bottom of that stack that I started reading in April, and there it remains. So this is where I'm at with my reading. Quite a lot going on. I'm in no rush. I have my entire life to read these books. Be sure to let me know in the comments below if you read any of these and what you're up to in terms of your reading this week.